David Shaw here with another off-the-record story. If you want to learn more about Washington, D.C., come visit my site, offtherecordtours.com. Let's go. It's summertime, and whether you're at the beach or on a lake or, like me, recovering from knee surgery, you may be looking for a good book. So today I thought I'd share with you what I think are some of the best books about Washington, D.C. First, at the top of my list is the classic All the President's Men. Written in 1974 by the Washington Post reporters who broke the Watergate story wide open, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, it shows the meticulous reporting that went into covering this great event. Now, we all know how the story is going to end, but it doesn't keep it from being a real page-turner. And while media has changed so much since '74, how good reporting is done has not. And this shows you how important getting the facts right is. Now, best of all, a lot of the scenes that take place in this book, like the garage where they meet Deep Throat, the Watergate, and the building across the street that was used for a lookout, are all included on some of my tours, so we can see them together. Next is Washington Goes to War by David Brinkley. I love this book. For those of you who remember Brinkley's on-air presence, you can hear his sarcastic, acerbic wit as he tells these stories. Now, before World War II, Washington was just a sleepy backwater southern town, but the war transforms it. And this was published in 1988, about the same time I arrived in Washington. And I really like this because this book got me interested in Washington's past. Not the very distant past, but the past many people still remembered. And I enjoyed it immensely and still turn to it from time to time. He tells great stories as the city is plunged into the modern era. Advise and Consent by Alan Drury is probably the best novel about the machinations of Capitol Hill. Written during the Cold War in 1959, it tells the story of a controversial Secretary of State who may have had communist sympathies in the past. Throw in a dying president, a ruthless senator, and a past homosexual affair, which was shocking to write about at the time, and you have a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel. Best of all, it's passed the test of Washington time. Personal History by Katharine Graham, the late publisher of the Washington Post, is a true gift. She talks about how her family acquired the Post and how when her father dies, he leaves the Post in his will to her husband, thinking that there's no way a woman could possibly manage a large newspaper. She's candid about her husband's mental illness and suicide, what it was like to take over the Post on short notice. And despite being extremely wealthy, knowing nothing of money. And since her life is so much history, she tells stories about the Kennedys, LBJ, Bob McNamara, the Reagans, Supreme Court justices, and a wonderful cast of characters. Best of all, it gives us a glimpse of Washington when Georgetown was still the center of political and social life. Lost in the City by Edward P. Jones has nothing to do with politics or power, but everything to do with the life of everyday folks in the district. In this series of short stories, Jones takes you on a journey of the joys and sorrows of a small section of the city. And as you read it, you visualize the places you've been and you imagine the places that you haven't gone to yet. But I felt sad reading this story. It's written in 2005, and you know how much these people love their neighborhoods and how much a part of these neighborhoods make up the core of what Washington is really like. But you also know gentrification is coming in the years ahead. And these people many of them will lose their homes and their neighborhoods will never be the same. If you want to read a comprehensive history of the district, I would turn to Chocolate City, a history of race and democracy in the nation's capital by Chris Auck and Derek Musgrove. Chocolate City was the nickname for the town, coined in the 1970s when it was still a majority black city. And they go back to the very beginning, the time of the Nacastans, who were the Native American inhabitants of this land. They were here long before the English settlers arrived. And they go from that period forward. They talk about how the city was surveyed, developed, who made money in the process and who didn't, enslavement, riots, Marion Barry, the rise of the black middle class, the control board, go-go, everything up until today, where the city becomes wealthier and whiter. Now, it's a 4-century-long story, and at its core, I believe, is this head-on collision between our American ideals of democracy and the lack of freedom of the enslaved people who lived here, and the lack of voting rights for everybody else. They do a wonderful job, and if you really want to take a deep dive into DC before your visit, this is the book I'd choose. Well, when I get my other knee done, we'll talk about the best movies that take place in Washington, D.C. Until then, grab a lemonade or a gin and tonic, sit back, and enjoy a good summer read. Well, I hope you enjoyed that off-the-record story. If you want to learn more about Washington, D.C., things seen and unseen, arrange your tour of your nation's capital at offtherecordtours.com. Until then, I'm David Shaw.